Makios, Phiri from Zimbabwe. And I'll do, yes, sir.
I just realized, I'm not sure this. Jean-Pierre, huh?
Jean-Pierre
Who was to join us.
Yeah.
Did he send a presentation that he wanted Rudolf to make? And is that here? That might be here. Yeah, because I think he sent his presentation to Rudolf.
Rudolf, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you prepared to do that, or at another time?
I think maybe why we go ahead, maybe close the end of the
No, because this is the place he was going to do it.
So,
So if you can,
okay, just about 5 minutes.
all right, you'll
Because
join.
This is in French, so I need to.
You just summarize it.
Yeah. You can summarize it. Sit up here, and then you can. Or don't say whatever. No, I'm sorry. Do what you want. I'll stop now.
So on that note, allow me to also introduce Jean-Pierre. Sorry, Rudolf. On a light note, so you can please. I know Matt speaks good French, so. So I'm going to do this a bit differently, but I was looking at the presentation by Anna Tibaijuka, and she spent quite a bit of time in Kenya because she worked with the UN Habitat, which is based in Nairobi. And she reminds me of one important thing for my brothers and sisters from Kenya. The term collaborators is not new when we talk about independence. And we can talk about that later. But it's a good reminder, the collaborators. But then I'm going to do this differently, and I'm not going to introduce any of you. I'll allow you 1 minute each to just tell us about yourself and your presentation before you go into it. And I'll begin with the brother from far away. Just a 1 minute introduction of yourself and what you're going to talk about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I am Moses Pande, Dr. Moses Pande John, from South Sudan. I'm a civil society activist and a co-founder of Organization for Nonviolence and Development, and also a co-convener of the Pan-African Nonviolence and Peacebuilding Network, PANPEN, which we refer to as a network of the networks. So my conversation will center around the legacy of colonialism in Sudan, with an S. You know, Sudan used to be one country, but then at some point it is split. So we want to look at the legacy of colonization with focus on the policy of divide and rule, how people were divided, and also later on how resources became an issue, particularly land, and how land was also used in order to further divide communities and people. So that will be the center of my conversation. And as we know, that Sudan also, as a country, by then has connections with Palestine, and therefore that connection will also be taken into account as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. We can do. Thank you. I'll go to the further end as he prepares. Yes, sir.
My name is Makios Phiri from Zimbabwe. I'm the coordinator for Nonviolence Education Training Program for the Fellowship of Reconciliation Zimbabwe. I'll be presenting on a small paper I've entitled Reappropriating Nonviolence in African Traditional Models as Mechanism for Peace Building. Basically, I think that's it.
Thank you. We know you, but tell us something about Jean-Pierre in his absence.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And this is really,
And it's a tough one.
it's really a tough one, though. But anyway, I'm going to be sitting here on behalf of Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre is the president of the Fellowship for Reconciliation in Congo, and he is the co-vice president of the International Fellowship for Reconciliation. Briefly, that is who Jean-Pierre is.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Now, which Congo, DR or Brazzaville?
DRC.
Yes.
Brazzaville.
Brazzaville, sorry.
Brazzaville.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Oh, sorry, Phiri. So let me get this right. Is it Phiri or Phiri? Phiri.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Moses Monday,
Yes.
let's begin from here. You are the only brother I can harass.
Yes.
And I'll begin from there. You talked about, before your presentation, the Pan-African Nonviolence and Peace Building Network.
Yeah.
If I'm listening to this for the first time, what is this about? I know I heard about it 12 years ago,
Yeah.
and later on 10 years ago, and we were together, but thank you. Not everybody was there to know the journey 10 years or 12 years later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pan-African Nonviolence and Peace Building Network is actually a network of diverse actors that work on issues of nonviolence and peace building. And with that, it actually encompasses civil society organization, faith-based groups, and also academia. So the Pan-African Nonviolence and Peace Building Network is a network of networks in sense that actually it represents over 40 countries in Africa, and also over 70 organizations in total. They are represented as members in PANPEN. So what we do in PANPEN is this is a space for us to share our stories, to learn from the best practices, and also to inspire, to encourage, and to empower one another in order to do our work even better. So our core mandate is actually to have a solidarity with one another. And that's why members of the PANPEN, they are not all in Africa. So we refuse to confine ourselves with geography or with geographical boundaries. As we learned even yesterday, we have Africans in Latin America and other parts of the world, and we feel they are also part of the PANPEN. We also write our stories in academically accredited publishers. So all this is actually the contribution of the PANPEN members, and the way we manage the network is by voluntarily using our own resources. So it's actually one way that we use our own resources in order to move the mandate of the PANPEN forward.
Thank you, Moses. And in one sentence, where are we 10 years later as a network?
Well, 10 years later, the experience with PANPEN is that every year the network expands. The last gathering we had was in 2022. That was in Juba. And we had a marvelous members who, even those who joined for the first time, they were there in Juba, and we had conversations and we shared our stories. And after Juba, here we are in Tanzania, in Arusha. And I'm sure with this introduction of PANPEN, many individuals those who are interested to join us, they are most welcome to do so. You don't need to fill any form. You just need to express your interest, give us your contacts, and we will then engage you and feel free to also let us know what kind of contribution are you happy to share with us? So we are actually an open network, and we are open for all those who are interested. There are actually members who are not necessarily Africans, like by origin, but they actually work towards the cause of promoting what peace and stability in the region. They are also partners in PANPEN.
Thanks so much, Moses. Because we've heard your voice, let's hear the first presentation from Phiri. And oh, it's on PowerPoint. Huh?
Okay.
So probably need to.
We can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all very much for this audience. Like I said, I'm Makios from Zimbabwe. Now, it took about 15 years of violent conflict for Zimbabwe to get its political independence. Thousands upon thousands of women, children died in that struggle. Then it took again another 5 years of internal conflict, which estimates say about 20,000 people died. That's from 1982 to 1987. It was an internal conflict in Zimbabwe, basically between two tribes, the Shona, which is the majority, and the Ndebele, which are the minority. But was so happy somehow, as Zimbabweans, we managed to choke each other out. And since 1987 up to now, we might be struggling economically and everything else. But one thing that we appreciate in our nation is peace. You only appreciate peace when you encounter the absence of peace. So this is the background of my presentation, having a strong background in active non-violence. A very, very strong background in active violence from my young students' years up to now. The title of this small paper is Reappropriating Non-Violence and African Traditional Models as Mechanism for Peace Building. Most African countries are experiencing violent conflicts, while some others are at risk of experiencing similar crises. Among these countries include South Sudan, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, and Burundi, which have resulted in the loss of life and properties and forced displacement. You can check with that World Economic Summit 2018. Causes of these conflicts are complex and deep-rooted in the legacy of colonialism, which include the ethnic tensions, the quality of governance, the rule of law, and violation of human rights, chronic poverty, resource distribution, resource exploitation, and underdevelopment. The main purpose of this paper is how to blend non-violence in African traditional models in the process of conflict resolution, prevention, and peace building to achieve a positive and sustainable peace. In this regard, to adequately address the thematic issues under discourse, I shall take a brief overview of the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial African traditional institutions, establish a theoretical framework for understanding the relevance of African traditional models in conflict and prevention and peace building. Additionally, a critical assessment of how African traditional models can contribute to the prevention of management of conflicts. In the final analysis is an examination of how African traditional institutions can coexist with the Western institutions of governance, especially for the purpose of prevention and peace building around the globe. Given the rise of conflicts in different continents, as mentioned earlier, the inclusion of African traditional political structures in the matrix of conflict prevention and resolution becomes extremely relevant. Indigenous African political structures and practices haven't been fully understood. They've been marginalized in the majority of modern African states. However, some of the indigenous social political structures, as we will see in subsequent sections of this paper, can still play a vital role in governance and conflict resolution, both at local and national levels. In most societies, there were local administrative structures based on traditional structures that existed before colonialization. These fulfilled vital functions such as custodians of customary law and communal practice assets, particularly land and water, guardians and symbols of cultural values and religious practices, ensuring integrity, enforcing laws, and also settling of disputes. So disputants often refer their cases to elders and neighborhood mediators who can be relied on to resolve disputes in local dialects using some basic principles. In traditional African societies, conflict resolution involves the following: mediation, arbitration, and negotiation. These methods, according to Ajay, were effective in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, particularly in traditional African society conflicts and the intra-tribal conflicts in general. I'll briefly discuss these approaches for a deep understanding of the conflict resolution process in African traditional societies. So mediation is a non-coercive intervention by mediators, which are called third parties, to either reduce or in some cases go beyond that. And the mediators usually wish that peace and harmony reign supreme in the community. In traditional African society, adjudication involves bringing all disputants in the conflict to a meeting in the chambers or compounds of family heads, quarter heads, and palace courts, as the case may be. Reconciliation was the most significant aspect of conflict resolution, anchored on the principle of give a little and get some. The reconciliation function is practiced by an authority figure that mediates between these two conflicting parties, but is empowered to make binding judgments. Thus, pre-colonial Africa was not as dark a continent as suggested by colonialists and some Western scholars. It's very important to re-emphasize this again. Pre-colonial Africa was not a dark continent as suggested by colonialists and some Western scholars. However, colonialism brought about a role change as the roles of traditional rulers were either usurped by colonialists or their subjects. As intermediaries between the colonial state and local people, chiefs were now expected to maintain peace and order within their communities. The theoretical framework here, Thomas Kuhn model of conflict management, formed the basis of this analysis, as it provided us with a robust foundation for the explanation of the process involved in peace building in Africa. It explained the strategic intentions that could be organized around the matrix of two factors: assertiveness and cooperativeness. We jointly produced five conflict management styles: avoidance, accommodation, competition, compromise, and collaboration. It is prudent for countries to assume that they are likely to have several types of conflicts which their judicial systems cannot deal with, and that resorting to military may not be the wisest course of action. While this position suggests that violent conflicts will continue to go on the increase, except there's a movement from the country state-centric approaches to conflict prevention and management to the one that will give prominent roles to African traditional political institutions, especially in conflicts involving local communities and identity struggles. African traditional model is relevant in the management of conflicts emanating from the process of state building. And so, careful notes, coercive approaches to state building fail because in the contemporary view of human rights, Violent, coercive unification, and repressive homogenization are morally and socially bankrupt. Far from leading to a long-term peace and stability, military victories in cases of internal resentment against the state, if attained, leads only to a temporary lull in violent conflicts, accompanied by intense resentment and resistance, which are likely to be followed by a new cycle of hostilities. By contrast, conflict resolution mechanism through traditional institution mechanism establishes peace and harmony in an order which helps to prevent future feuds. This is true based on the fact that resolving conflicts, the traditional institutions mechanism narrows the difference between the protagonists. Consensual decision-making mechanism can enhance state building by creating possibilities for accommodating the interests of different sub-state entities and the protection of minority interests. In Zimbabwe, there's an elder council in various communities who are volunteers and who are not paid for their services, apart from a small token to purchase refreshments or bills during the hearing of the disputes. Traditional political institutions remain an enduring part of the African heritage and plays a critical role as the custodian of culture and traditions. Since traditional rulers are closely linked to the grassroots, so they understand the problems of their people, they remain veritable instruments in search for peace, order, and stability across the continent of Africa. In fact, traditional conflict resolution mechanism has the potential to be effective beyond the local level, given an enabling political environment. Unlike government-appointed administrators, lower-level chiefs and village elders live in conditions largely similar to those of their communities. They share common interests, they think like their people, and as a result, they are better equipped to represent the interests of their communities than are government-appointed or elected officials. Traditional methods of social control, such as communal solidarity, traditional oath, rewards, vigilance, informal settlements, checks and balances, decentralization, effective communication, and good governance, remain strong and have been informally used successfully for conflict management in many local communities across the countries in Africa. Africa's traditional political values and customer laws are essential to the continent's transformation. The role of authorities who are engaged in practice the maintenance of these values are indispensable. Chiefs, especially those at the grassroots level, and elders in the decentralized political system, are leaders in the practice of those values, and they form an integral, albeit informal, part of the governance structures in rural Africa. Therefore, traditional institutions and authority and legitimacy that post-colonial governments are yet to attain. That is, the effective means of capturing the minds of many Africans is to work through their traditional institutions. The British colonialists co-opted the strongest of these through the system of indirect rule, as Boyne mentioned, that chiefs and village heads under civil chieftains constitute a forum where local interests are debated and articulated. They constitute a valuable resource in conflict prevention and management, as well as in mobilizing rural population for active engagements. The resolution of conflict in northern Uganda has revealed that there is a rich body of traditional systems of law and justice that reflect the principles of conflict management with both the retributive and restorative elements. As I conclude, one of the wrong steps taken by post-colonial political leaders was the manner in which the pre-colonial political institutions were relegated to the background in the process of governance. The reduction of the powers and functions of the African traditional political institutions, and in some other cases, their total obligation, can be attested as one of the major reasons for the continuous increase in violent conflicts across the continent. There's therefore the need for a total integration of the African political institutions in the process of governance. And the integration that goes beyond the regular recognition of the Council of Chiefs that primarily exists as advisory bodies to the government, to a body that has certain levels of autonomy and handling. And these are just the references that were used for this short, small paper. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Phiri. I think we can do a better round of applause. That's almost there. Thank you. I pick from your presentation one key important thing, and the gap and the missing link between the traditional political institutions of governance and the post-colonial systems of governance. And we'll talk about that as we move ahead. I want to thank you very much once again. Moses, karibu sana.
Thank you.
That's what they would say here and in Kenya. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. The issue of colonization and how it affected the two Sudans and even beyond goes back to 1898. Because before that period, the Sudanese people, actually, they lived together in harmony. There were no much divide among the people. The only difference is that they see that there is the south and the north. The south, the people living in the southern part of Sudan and the north part of Sudan. But otherwise, Sudan was accommodative of all its sons and daughters, and was home for over 560 different ethnic groups. And Sudan used to be the largest country in Africa, as many of you know. But of course, the many people who reside in the northern part of Sudan, they are mostly, not mostly actually, they identify with Arab identity, while the people in the southern part of Sudan, they generally identify as Africans. But that was never a problem before the colonial time. And of course, as some of you might know, that it was not easy for British to colonize Sudan alone. So they had to team up with Egypt. And that's why it is commonly known as Anglo-Egyptian condominium role. So our neighbors in Egypt, they actually colluded with Britain in order to colonize Sudan. And so when colonizers came to Sudan in 1898, they started to employ the policy of divide and rule. And the policy of divide and rule is simply they exploited the differences that the Sudanese people have. For example, they started favoring more Arabs in the north, who are mostly Muslims, against the black Africans in the south, but also in the west and eastern Sudan. And as it happened in South Africa, for example, the policy of divide and rule is simply you favor one group against the other, and by doing so, one group will have more advantage against the other, and that will actually make them to hate each other, and eventually they may end up fighting each other. And when they fight, it gives the colonizer an opportunity to do what he, or is actually mostly he actually. So it gives them an opportunity to exploit. Because if you don't fight, because if you don't fight, you will all have the attention, to follow what is going on. But when you fight, it's like they throw a shining object somewhere, and as you look at the shining object, then they have an opportunity to do what they want to do. So because of that policy, the Sudanese people, they started feeling hatred against each other, particularly along South North lines. And even before independence of Sudan in 1956, the oil was discovered in Sudan, and the oil was mostly in the south, and that's why the colonizer thought it wise that our northern brothers they will take over when they were forced to leave, and that means we will continue to be marginalized by our own Sudanese people as it happened. And even after independence, the marginalization of the southern Sudanese continued, because one example was after the colonial masters left, the Sudanese people, of course, they came up with administrators to run the country. And from 800 top government administrators, only 3 come from southern region. Out of 800, only 3 come from South Sudan. So that is actually one critical example that shows that actually the southern region is being marginalized. And because of that, there was actually a rebellion which happened actually before even the independence was declared, because South Sudanese they learned that actually even if Sudan declared independence, it is not going to be in their favor. And that's why there was a rebellion which continued until 1972 when a peace agreement was signed. But again, when oil was discovered in 1970s, the Khartoum regime decided to abrogate the agreement, because they realized the agreement, I mean, the oil was mostly in the southern part of Sudan. So by allowing the southern region to have a self-autonomy means they will have upper hand in oil. And so they came up with a policy to divide southern Sudan into 3 regions. And that actually enabled them to regain control over the south. Even further, in 1983, Sudan took another step to divide the country along religious line. When Islamic Sharia was introduced in September 1983 by President Nimeri, but it was engineered actually by Sheikh Dr. Hassan Abdallah Turabi. Now, the Constitution of Sudan by then clearly, in the preamble, it clearly defines Sudan being multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society. That was beautiful. But the same constitution also says Islamic Sharia is the only and main source of legislation in the country. Come on. This is a clear sign of a structural violence, because the preamble acknowledges the diversity of faith, religion, and race, and somewhere in the same constitution it says Islamic Sharia is the main source of legislation, of all legislation, meaning it has already contradicted the principle. And that actually put the Sudanese people into actually that they are not, particularly the southern part of Sudan, they felt they are not recognized. And that, with that, actually a rebellion also started in May 1983. And the leader of the then rebel movement, Dr. John Garang Mabior, he came up with a concept of New Sudan. He said, we wanted New Sudan on new basis, and the basis are equality and justice for all. And he argued that I can be an African, an African can choose to be a Muslim. You don't have to be an Arab in order to become a Muslim, and Arabs, they can choose to become Christians, that's their own, And so he actually came up with a program to unify Sudan on the basis that we are Sudanese people rather than South Sudanese or North Sudanese, Arabs or Africans. So the question of African origin, the question of being Arab was less important because for him, he was advocating for Sudan based on our identity as Sudanese people. And so that was a response to the colonial policy of divide and rule. As civil society, it was around that time that the Sudanese Organization for Nonviolence and Development was established. And at first, the founders were mostly, actually, they were entirely from Southern region. But then they realized that the problem of Sudan was much bigger than what Southern Sudanese can address. So they started engaging also people from other parts of Sudan. Because at first we realized we saw ourselves as marginalized. But as we started engaging, we realized there are actually Sudanese people in the far north. They are even worse. They are also actually worse than their situation is even worse than us in Southern Sudan. And so we started building coalitions and working together as civil society in order to address the problem. And so the legacy of colonization was really strong. They utilized the differences that existed between Sudanese people in order to further divide them. And that eventually led to the people of South Sudan demanding for the right for the self-determination, which according to, based on the peace agreement, CPA, the comprehensive peace agreement, they decided actually they failed in January 2011, and over 98% of the population, they actually voted in favor of secession. Now, when South Sudan attained its independence, we were all happy and we were all proud that we have a country that we can call of our own. Unfortunately, the spirit of tribalism, because during Sudan we were divided by religion. Now, when we attained our independence, actually it shifted to tribalism. You know, the same people, but the tribalism was actually seen in the way actually like we govern ourselves. So the feeling of tribes came up. That feeling was not there during the years of struggle. We were all together as South Sudanese struggling for an independent country. But when we attained our independence, you know, the feeling of tribalism started coming up. And that's actually what is a challenge that we are still addressing. For me to summarize this, as Professor said, those who colonize us, their legacy, unless we cooperate to continue with the divide and rule policy, actually we can put an end to the legacy of colonization. Because it is over 50 years that Sudan was colonized. Why are we still using the same policy? And I think even in many African countries, after colonizers left, the indigenous people also continue to use the same policy of divide and rule in order to consolidate power and to continue to actually have power. And therefore, in our time now, it is very critical that we have to be very cautious of policies of divide and rule. We have to be very cautious of the need to share resources, whether it is power or even economic resources, because it is those resources, when they are not shared equitably, they begin to create sentiments in people, which eventually leads to resistance. And so it is important that, particularly for South Sudanese, where I come from, we need to actually to have a conversation among ourselves in order to identify how best do we govern ourselves, because South Sudan is not poor. Even when it comes to resources, we are actually better off than Northern Sudan. Okay, but we only had 2 years after independence, and the country relapsed into conflict, and the conflict is still ongoing. So it is a question of putting an end to the ongoing crisis, so that the sons and daughters of South Sudan can sit together and agree among themselves in a dialogue to agree on priorities, particularly on how they want to be governed and how can they share the resources, agree on the best system of governance that will actually empower people to have control over the resources. Resources of the country should not be left to governments, because we all know that governments have their priorities, and in most cases, their priorities don't fit the priorities of the people, you see? And therefore, the people should be empowered so that they have that space and they have a say on how their resources are being governed. That's very important. And with this, I would like to stop here, and we will continue to engage when it is time for us to discuss this further. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Moses, for that history that some of us did not know. And of course, the current happenings. We still wish the youngest country the best. But what I'm picking is the need for objective dialogue on how we want to move forward as a country. And we'll continue to have that conversation. Thank you very much. Another round of applause. Jean-Pierre.
Yes.
Karibu.
Thank you so much. I think this is, the best thing to do would just maybe be to read through. So I hurriedly did this so that we could actually, just follow as I read, because the pronunciation at some point may not be, I may not pronounce the way you want to hear, but you can actually just flow through as I, read. I'm just going to read what Jean-Pierre sent, and I'm sure that, yes. But now I will still need this.
Yes, you need that. I can hold it for you.
So you can just flow through, and you can easily see when you move on to the next page. So I'm just going to read what he sent, and I'm sure if there are any questions, I could also write them down and send it to him immediately, in case he can respond as fast as possible. So we thank God for technology already. All right, so I'll just move on straight. So the topic here is narrowing the risk of reconciliation in situations of past and present violence in Africa. This is a presentation by Jean-Pierre Masamba. Living in the midst of the dramatic realities of violence in Africa, in the past and today, with all their magnitude and complexity, we experience that in this context, to embark on possible paths of reconciliation is to take risk. We must dare to take risk, this risk of reconciliation, in order to build or rebuild peaceful relations between individuals, groups, and peoples within a divided community or society. For the parties involved, there is the risk of not having a clear consensus on the very understanding of the concept of post-conflict reconciliation. This lack of understanding stems from the sometimes divergent interests of perpetrators and victims, slave owners and slaves, colonizers and colonized. Does reconciliation mean surrendering to the victors of violent conflict? Does it mean questioning or denying victory and domination? Does the stronger party risk imposing its vision of reconciliation? Well, talking about reconciliation, it can make some people angry or even ridiculous, because others see reconciliation as an impossibility in the face of the pain of slavery, colonization, and neo-colonization. With the multiplication of intrastate conflicts and wars since the 1990s. Talking about reconciliation as well is like stirring up the wounds of this pain. For some, it's even a political, cultural, or economic hypocrisy, since in history there have often been forced reconciliations. The road to reconciliation is riddled with the risk of false reconciliations, especially when this road to reconciliation is proposed or imposed only to forget, to cover up lies, or to stifle justice. False reconciliation in a post-conflict situation is already in itself an appearance of a new violence, the violence of lies, which in the end can give rise to other open or hidden violence, generating more desire for vengeance, rancor, or hatred. There is a risk that the elite rhetoric of reconciliation is not in harmony with the popular will for genuine reconciliation based on truth and justice, the conditions for a future centered on a serene revival of togetherness between individuals and peoples. There is often a risk that elites will impose reconciliation, but reconciliation cannot be imposed from outside. It must come from the heart of the individuals and be adapted to the cultural and historical particularities of each society. There is also the risk that the political elite will convene people in a large party hall, and also a few days of grand speeches fueled by partisan acclaim proclaim reconciliation over glasses of champagne, ready for the sharing of the cake of power and other privileges. Like the ceasefire signing stage, the high mass of reconciliation can be an important step. But it is only one stage in the process that gradually engages the whole community in tackling the deep roots of conflict, to emerge from violence on an emotional, psychological, and spiritual level in order to rebuild trust over time between individuals or groups of people with the aim of relearning to live together in harmony. This means avoiding the risk of locking the reconciliation process into techniques. Rather, in this transition, the different components of the community or human society appropriate the dynamics of reconciliation according to their realities in order to move from a situation of violence to one of lasting peace. In its spiritual, moral dimension, there is a risk that reconciliation will be confused with forgiveness, like restorative justice. Necessary forgiveness is a factor in true reconciliation. Indeed, true reconciliation challenges our personal and collective lives, our hearts, our political, socio-economic, and cultural systems. To take the path of reconciliation is to take the risk of committing ourselves to a process of transforming our lives, our decisions, our ways of believing, the risk of accepting to meet, listen, and speak with others who have also experienced, whatever their place or role, the tragedy of slavery, foreign invasion, colonization, economic misery, fear, and division. In building the Pan-African peace movement in solidarity with all the peoples of other continents, my dear brothers and sisters, let us be courageous and take the risk together to follow the path of reconciliation, to celebrate the message of reconciliation in its political, institutional, communal, interpersonal, and individual dimensions. Institutional, communal, and interpersonal dimensions. For reconciliation is the word of God that gathers and unites all women and men, all human persons, in other words, all Bantu, Muntu, the singular. Taking the risk of reconciliation is the price of true reconciliation. For over 100 years, alongside other actors, AFPREA, the International Fellowship for Reconciliation, has been committed to this risk of reconciliation. Thank you very much for your support. Jean-Pierre Masamba.
first time, Rudolf, thank you very much, not Jean-Pierre, for taking up that challenge of stepping into a brother who is not here, stepping into his shoes. So thank you. So I'll welcome back the panelists so that and listening to that presentation by Rudolf on behalf of Jean-Pierre, one thing stands out for me, and the reconciliation, the way we see it, and it's when the political elite are able to shake hands and share something, and that reminds me of what I witnessed in Kenya a few years ago during the 2007-2008 post-election violence, and we had the now famous Kofi Annan mediation process, if some of you can remember that. Yeah. And those of us who followed up that keenly remember that there were 4 agendas in that process. Agenda number 1 was to stop the violence, number 2 was humanitarian assistance, but number 3 was power sharing. That was agenda number 3. Nothing still about the common citizen. And that came in form of agenda number 4, which was reforms. So we'll share power and get what we want, then we'll think about your reforms. So that reminds me of that. But then let's give a round of applause to our and allow me to open this up, not only for questions, but comments and anything that you want to say about those presentations. So the floor is open while they are here. So let me start at the back as I come this way. Sometimes when I see ladies raise their hands, I'm tempted to ignore the men. So you'll pardon my stupidity.
Using the traditional conflict resolution practices that were in place. I guess my question is, how many of the traditional institutions are still respected today? And how many people are actually still relating to those institutions? Because I'm wondering if they still have the authority and the power to really be able to facilitate reconciliation and resolve conflicts. And my other question is, traditionally, how are those people prepared to play those roles? And how do we make sure that people have the skills to do it today?
Thank you. I saw your hand.
Is the mic working? Or I just
No,
no,
it's for purposes of recording.
Oh, for recording.
Yeah. So it's
otherwise,
important.
I just wanted to go straight and. Okay, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much, colleagues, for your lovely presentation and so on. I've got 2, if not 3 questions. I think 2 for our brother from Sudan or South Sudan, you have to be specific. I would like to know if the issue of color is also a problem in Sudan or in South Sudan. Because you recall that when you were still in Sudan, they used to have that issue and so on. Now that you are on your own as South Sudan, are you also accommodating, our brothers from the Arab origin or, so I would like to have some clear explanation. Now, following your situation in Sudan, now that you are in South Sudan, who's fighting who? Because you moved from Sudan, then you are now in South Sudan, then there now you have started tribalism. Now who's fighting who? Then this one goes to my brother Jean-Pierre, because I'm using the original author and so on. Now, that issue of because it's like there are those they think that they are too big to sit with others in order to reconcile. And then from there now we come to what our brother was saying. It's now like drama on TVs. You see people shaking, whatever. So then from there, nothing happens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, brothers. Just wanted to just ask, that was I would have to read that position paper from John Pierre again, because there's so much information in it, even though you read it so elegantly, my brother. But I wanted to just ask, in the context of actually fighting against oppression, still being oppressed, where does the process of reconciliation come when somebody has their foot up your butt still oppressing you? When somebody's still actively killing you? Or is this a thing that happens when the fighting is actually over? And even like, John Pierre gave some excellent caution signs there. The word risk is chock full of warnings of how it can go awry, how it can be exploited by the powers that be. A good example is what's going to happen when they finish decimating our sisters and brothers in Gaza. What's that going to look like? Some neo-colonial United States going to infuse a bunch of resources into the area, set up some puppet Palestinian Uncle Tom regime, and have the Palestinians fighting against each other. You understand how, and then call it reconciliation. It's just a question I'm asking, how does that fit in the context when there's actual fighting going on, when there's actual virulent, toxic, real, brutal oppression still happening? Where does that fit, or does it fit at all? Thank you. Here you go, brother man.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to imagine, since yesterday we are talking about the conflicts, and if I summarize all the three presentations, the issue is about conflicts and what is happening in the continent. And then what the main reason here, you find the major reason, the major one, the first one, the top one, is about resources. So if the conflicts are caused by the resources, so how are we going to solve this? Now back to Jama, Mwalimu, we have to learn from Mwalimu. Mwalimu Nyerere immediately started around what we call Jama, self-reliant. And that philosophy was communicated all over the country, and people in the country understood what that meant. And we were united. We united together, and as a community, above 120 tribes came together, and we are united, as you can see, Tanzania today. So my suggestion in this big conference, we have heard from Professor Tibaijuka that there is no peace without development, no peace without development. And when you are talking about resources in Southern Sudan, my friend, you may say, okay, Sudan is rich. If those resources cannot give food on the table to the common people, that country is not rich. It's not. So how are we going to combat change resources to change the lives of the people? You need a philosophy. You need what Mwalimu did. You have to unite the people. And you have to come up with a model, a philosophy, which drives policies of the country. Constitution itself alone cannot help. You need a model which drives policy. Where do you take the policies? What is the source of the economic policies? Education, health. You need a philosophy. Mwalimu did that. Ujamaa. We drive our economic approaches. We united. The friends came here understanding that we are socialists. So I suggest this is the last point, moderator. With this big conference, we have to come up with an output. Let's unite the continent. Let us come with a good economic model, learning from what Mwalimu did, And even from the Nordics, but Tibaijuka has said it, we can't work in isolation. Let us learn and come up with a model which is going to influence our policies in the continent so that the economic development is inclusive. People have to share and enjoy the benefits of the resources we have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at the hands that were up earlier, but I'll get to all of you eventually. So don't worry. But you're reminded that tea is here, so we can have our tea as we continue. Yes.
I have a comment more than a question, but my brothers, I would love your reflection on it. It really is in response to what Brother Jihad you just asked, because Jihad, I think your question is fundamental. It's fundamental not just to the past, but to the present and the future. And I think the answer I want to give, though I'm not Jean-Pierre, does come from the position of having been an officer, not now, but recently, of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation with Jean-Pierre, but also some of the Pan-Africanist context of your question regarding Bill Sutherland and Z, regarding Archbishop Desmond Tutu and others. I think it's first correct to say that this question of reconciliation and how Jihad's question would be answered is going to be different, even amongst E4 and within the structures of people who believe in that process. But I think for the majority of Pan-Africanist Jihad and for the majority of us that have been doing this work, the answer is quite simple. Reconciliation cannot exist without resistance. And if someone said, if your boot is on my neck, my first job is to get your boot off of my neck, not to kiss your boot and say, let's be brothers and friends. So it's clear that when an active situation of violence and war and terror and genocide is going on, ending that, and one might say ending that by any means, is the significant priority. Reconciliation is important. And it's part of the process of recapturing our global humanity. But we don't stop with reconciliation. That is simply a position of defeat. It's also true that peace studies pioneer Johan Galtung talked about positive and negative peace. So that the idea of neocolonialism, of economic oppression, is as violent, and we know, as genocidal as anything else. So even if your gun is not to my head militarily, if your gun is to my head economically, resistance is still in order. So when Bill Sutherland taught us about what he meant by nonviolence in the 60s and 70s, it was always support SWAPO, support FRELIMO. Yes, understand the longer term pictures of what we need to do to build a society of peace, but don't withdraw support from the national liberation struggles because you have some heady idea about strategy and tactics. And finally, to be sure, when Tutu helped initiate the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, it was about a very specific historical moment where many in South Africa would say, apartheid, those bad white people. Yeah, a few, I was never part of that, not me. Those guys there. And all of a sudden, my brother Dennis Brutus, a poet whose 100th centenary is this year, who was in exile in the US for many of the years of apartheid, went back and he said, I couldn't find a single white person who had ever supported apartheid. And the whole idea of truth and reconciliation was to say that lie must be put to rest. Apartheid existed. It did this, that, and the other thing. And we must hold tribunals, we must hold commissions, we must hold forum to tell the truth. We must do that in order to reconcile. But it wasn't a reconciliation commission. It was a truth and reconciliation. It was about the idea that maintaining the struggle, including the ongoing struggle for economic justice, for freedom, to get your boot off my back, etc., was clear, including by many means. Reconciliation is important, but without resistance, it is not.
Thank you. Those are already many questions. So do we allow them to answer that round? Then we can take the next round of questions. What do you think? That's okay?
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you have the mic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the questions about who is fighting who in South Sudan, and
Put it closer. Yeah.
who is fighting who in South Sudan, and do we still have color issues in South Sudan? My colleague Light is here. Perhaps Light, you can step in to respond. And yes.
Unfortunately, Sudan in Africa, I think, is the only country that had 3 periods of colonialism. We had the first colonialism was Turkey and Egypt from 1821 to 1898. That was the period Sudan started the modern Sudan. That was one. 2, from 1898 to 1956. That was Egypt and British. The third was the Sudanese Arabs, 1956 to 2011. And during these 3 periods, we witnessed a lot of challenges, and we had a lot of experiences. And the first experience was actually the indirect rule, and where we talk of traditional authorities, which is explained about that, was used as a means of rule in the country for 2 reasons. One, the British was saying the decentralized government was cheap, was not costly. And that was why it was good to use the traditional leaders, the chiefs, to rule the country. Number 2, they were alien, they were foreigners, they did not understand the context of Sudan. That was why the traditional authorities become so effective in management of the country. And my conclusion about the traditional authorities, its effectiveness, frankly speaking, will only become effective in a democratic and political environment. Otherwise, it will not be effective, as far as the experience of my country is concerned. If there is political environment and democratic governance, traditional authorities will become effective as a tool of conflict resolution and reconciliation. That's one.
Who is fighting who?
Who is fighting who?
In South Sudan.
Who is fighting who in South Sudan?
Yes.
In Sudan, we were fighting Northern Sudanese, and the Arabs, the oppressed us in the country. After the independence, we moved into ethnicity. This ethnic group against ethnic group. In Sudan, we were fighting the Northern Arab Sudanese and the Southern African ethnic group in the country. Now, what has happened in the country, it is mostly between the 2 big ethnic groups, the Dinka and the Benue. That is what is happening currently in the country. Thirdly, we have a philosophy, and you may agree with me. A successful country like Tanzania, it was because of late Nyerere. In Zambia, Kaunda. In South Africa, Mandela. In Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser. And you may name them. Unfortunately, the vision of New Sudan was related to Dr. John Garang. If you open my computer and put the speech of Garang, that was the philosophy every country in Africa may admire. Unfortunately, his death brought a lot of inconvenience. The current leadership, to our understanding, have not actually taken the philosophy of Garang to move forward, professionalizing the governance system in the country. That's why it brought us to this day to be challenged that we don't have philosophy in the country, but otherwise we have philosophy in the country. And finally, a success of a leadership is dependent on a success of a country is dependent on the leadership, whether at the federal level, at the country level, at the state level. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, there's none in Kenya, so nothing to name. A small announcement, very small one, for our Muslim colleagues who would want to go to the mosque. Please let us know so that we arrange for the transport to the mosque at 12:30. Any Muslim who is here would want to go to the mosque.
I do.
So,
You're talking about for Juma, right?
yeah, for the Juma, yeah. So 1. Okay.
This
Thank
one?
you. Moses?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think my colleague Light has already answered the question of who is fighting who. We are fighting ourselves, the South Sudanese. And as Light said, during Sudan, it was actually South fighting the North. But that was the first thinking. But at some point, we realized the struggle was against the system in Sudan, in Khartoum. Because even there are northern Sudanese who joined the struggle, the liberation struggle. So it actually changed from fighting people to actually fighting a system based in Khartoum, because people realized it was the system which was the problem, not the people. And so that's actually what we will say. I will hand over to other colleagues. There are also questions about, I think, traditional mechanisms of conflict resolution.
Thank you very much. There are 2 questions that were posed here. How many institutions are still respected and how they are empowered? Maybe a quick note to help here. We are referring to African traditional models, not necessarily primitive models. These are African traditional models that we don't classify under primitive. I think that's clear. But I will take the Zimbabwean case. I want to reflect the Zambian one, but I think the Zambians are here. Often, most of our chiefs, a number of them are PhD holders. Most of our villages are master's holders. So let me reemphasize, I'm referring to African traditional models, not primitive models. I think that should be clear from the start. Indeed, allow me to take the Zimbabwean model, which I'm very privy to. This is a small research, which I'm believing, time permitting, we can do it at a bigger African level. In Zimbabwe, the traditional systems are still respected, and are still recognized, and are still honored. In fact, every 2 to 4 years, every chief in Zimbabwe is given a 4x4 all-terrain off-road vehicle. Every chief, yes. Their houses are taken care of the government. They are given allowances, and we have got the parliament, and then we've got the Senate. There's an allocation of 18 chiefs in the Senate of Zimbabwe. So when you vote for a parliament, senators are not voted for. Senators come from the ratio of the political parties that way. So in the Senate, there's an allocation of 18 chiefs. Again, let me reiterate, these are not primitive. In fact, our president chief, is the president of the African Parliament right now, Chief Charumbia. So if the African Parliament, the president of the African Parliament is a Zimbabwean chief by the name Chief Charumbira. He is also a senator in the government. The Chiefs Council exists, villages exist, community courts exist with comparative jurisdiction. A village chief constitutionally is mandated to settle a certain level of issues, mainly civil and not criminal. Marriages, constitutional, legal marriages can be solemnized at chiefs and village levels. Land issues can be settled at that level. The idea of this paper, and maybe the utopia vision, is to upgrade the African traditional models try to sync them with the Western models. I was thinking this other way through. The challenge of Africa is having a foundation that is round like this, but then building a square building. Normally it doesn't work. Thank you.
Any, just a minute. On the same?
I'm the same.
Okay. You know my
Oh, I have
weakness.
to use the mic.
That is dangerous.
It's very dangerous, but I can live with it.
I just, I want to challenge a little bit the idea of primitive versus, these are educated people. Because I think it's important that we value the kinds of knowledge and skills and the ways that those that knowledge is acquired and transmitted traditionally. It may not be in the form of, in the sense of a Western PhD program or institution, but there's so much value, so much knowledge and wisdom and skills that existed, whether you want to call them primitive or not, because they were not, written in this way or, and I think those are actually, right. And I think those are the skills that I think are actually more important in terms of resolving conflict, whether it's between individuals or communities, because it's really understanding humanity, right? And being able to hear what is not said as much as it is what is said, and to be able to make people feel like they're heard and felt, and that they're getting something out of the process, not just in terms of material or legal, formally understood structures, but in terms of their place in the community and how they're valued.
Where I come from, there's a common term, especially when referring to issues of gender. The Kenyans, the 2/3 gender rule, and the question about whether you want to count the numbers or make the numbers count. Rudolf, anything? I know you are trying to reach out to get responses. If you have, fine. If you still don't have, we can wait.
Well, there is a response
Okay,
to
please.
questions that
Then
have been posted.
You will be the first after that.
Thank you.
The weakness again. Yes.
All right. Okay, well, so there were two questions that were directed to Mr. Jean-Pierre. And the first, kind of a question, if it is possible for two unequal parties, I think that's how I summarized it, to come to the table of reconciliation. So the answer which Jean-Pierre gives is that yes, it is possible if the two parties are willing to show humility. If the two parties can be humble enough to come together on the reconciliation table, then it is possible. Because number one, it is difficult to find a reconciliation process involving two equal people. You most often find two unequal people. So one person always have the upper hand over the other. But what can actually unite these people is humility. That's basically what the answer he gave for that. And the second question, so if you are still being oppressed, is it possible to go on the reconciliation table? I think that was the second question. I think that's if someone is still actively oppressing you or like killing you, can you go for reconciliation? I think that was the second question that was being posed. And the answer which Jean-Pierre gives is that, first of all, it's difficult to go in for reconciliation when you're still being oppressed. So the first thing is not putting reconciliation as the first strategy here, but rather going in for dialogue, which according to Jean-Pierre is the best way to bring about peace. And then, after there must have been dialogue and there is an end to violence, the reconciliation process can then begin.
Thank you.
That is the answer which.
Okay, thank you. The next round of questions. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll do this side, then I'll come over the other side. So please, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Dr. Phiri. Thank you for your paper. You spoke brilliantly on the African tradition, African tradition as a model to resolve conflict. The traditional model being mediation, negotiation, family, and all of that. So in my class, we handled a course on international law, and that course took us to dive deep into the sources of our law. And before we got into the sources of our law, we talked about the law which existed before the colonial law. And then now we have 3 sources or more, I can't remember, which are still very colonial. And the law that operates today does not recognize the traditional law which existed. And I was a bit upset that if we have lawyers from then till now still operating on colonial laws which do not recognize the traditional law which existed even after we have gained independence, how practically how do you think we can work with the traditional model? Because we are trying to reintroduce it, but how when we still have colonial laws, the British law in existence? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Eric Siwango, and I also had, I would say, a question to also Dr. Phiri. Thank you for actually reminding us about the African traditional models, but also I liked how you begin your presentation by saying how Western scholars defined Africa as if it had no structure at all, as if it was a dark continent. But my concern with, I think, the African traditional model, I would want to begin my contribution based on this person that I follow the most. His name is Edwin Sifuna. He's a senator in Nairobi. Once in a television, he was arguing with his fellow senator. I think he was from Bokom. And then the senator told Edwin Sifuna to respect his elders. So when you started talking about African traditional models, the very first impression that I got was the elders. And then I was looking at these traditional models in terms of their structure. In my opinion, sometimes they are ethnic in nature, and sometimes they are associated with religion. So I'm like, if we're talking about involving them in terms of, bringing about peace, but then what if they become biased? But also, me as an African child, growing up, I've been told, for example, respect your elders. But what if they're lying? And then they're the people who come to the negotiation table to mediate, on behalf of my issues. So I have a very bit of a concern over there. I don't know how you're going to respond, but I think my key takeaway is, as much as we want the African traditional model, but then the same models that existed, that still exist, they can also undermine a certain group. Like for example, I'm not so much informed about South Africa, but I also know Winnie Mandela, for example, as championed in terms of the movement and so forth. But based on our African traditional models, like for example, in the patriarchy, we see women are left behind. For example, I come from a tribe called Nyamwezi in Tanzania, and I was shocked one time when I went to our village that in terms of decision making, women are not included. And even if, I mean, they have their own meeting, for example, to come about a certain solution, but as long as the men decide whatever that has to be done in the family, and that's it. Now, this is part of the African traditional models, I think, in terms of my understanding, maybe that's what we are talking about. But also, another comment I wanted to talk about is about the presentation of Pierre of reconciliation and compensation. Of reconciliation. So I wanted to understand, when we talk about reconciliation, for example, when he said the issue of the political elites, like these are the ones who usually decide, for example, when to go to the reconciliation tables. But then I'm like, just like our facilitator said about Kenya, like you come to power sharing, but then what about the interests of the citizens? Now, my question will be, how can we involve like the grassroots people in these reconciliation tables? Because I think these political elites, when they go to reconciliation, they will start now to talk about maybe their own damage maybe in their political parties, and thinking that their interests represent the larger group of the people. And like, for example, if we talk about power sharing to who? Are we talking about a certain entity or a certain person? So those were my key takeaways.
Thank you for that very long one. And I'm saying that so that the next person feels guilty and makes that weakness again.
Guilt as charged. Thank you very much. I wanna talk to our three presenters, but before I go, I wanna say that Magdalene here is our student. When she was saying that she studied law, she's doing Master of Leadership and Governance here. So she's referring to that. So my first question goes to, actually my question has been asked a lot by many people. So I'm just going to the aspect which was left behind. Particularly, I start with Pierre, represented by Rudolf. Your presentation discussed, I saw the issue of reconciliation. So when we are talking about reconciliation, we are talking about reconciliation who? Are the groups or the voices of the victims involved? For example, in a civil war, like what happened in South Sudan, when we were talking about reconciliation, where the groups of the women who are being raped, their voices were heard when people were discussing in the reconciliation tables, where the groups of those boys who were abducted and being as child soldiers, their voices were included during reconciliation. The groups of the old people and women who also suffered from the war also were being participated in the reconciliation. So when you are, reconciliation is a broader picture, a big word. What people are involved? Are we taking the voices of people in? So that is one. Now, number two of the question, it goes to my brother Phil, Dr. Phil, with regards to the chiefdoms in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for that. You explained very well. I didn't know. In Nyerere's Tanzania, he abolished all chiefdoms. So now I started to think maybe because of all what you have presented here. They are still here. We have some chiefs, but the government does not pay them. The government does not provide for them. But the chiefs are there and they have authority to that particular group which they are heading them. So I don't know how in Zimbabwe, would this be an example to Zimbabwe maybe to, I don't know. So that is it. And I think I've spoken now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for feeling guilty. I knew that was the trick.
Yeah.
Okay. John, let's theorize some peace. Are there some pluralism or diversity initiatives that we can also employ in the current conflict in South Sudan, besides the combat approach. Phiri, and linked to what she asked, in terms of the voices, how is nonviolence linked to empowerment, particularly economic empowerment, or how is it addressing the structure of violence? Because ultimately that needs to lead to some fundamental change, not just maintaining status quo, remaining peaceful, docile about the issues. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question about diversity in South Sudan?
I'm theorizing from a peaceful side.
Yeah.
And there are some pluralism, because you talked about so many communities. Pluralism initiatives or diversity initiatives that you can also employ to address some of those conflicts, to promote coexistence.
Yeah, thank you. Mine goes to Moses. I've heard about the DDR in Southern Sudan, the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. So I was wondering, how are these being addressed in the current peace building initiatives in Southern Sudan?
Thank you. That was the most guilty one.
Yeah.
My name is Dumelo Marema from South Africa. Thank you very much for those interesting presentations, especially the one by Jean-Pierre. I think it was very interesting. Sounded like he's speaking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, with the forced reconciliation and the reconciliation of elites that left out the ordinary people feeling disgruntled, and giving this wonderful image to the world that South Africa has reconciled. I think, so it's not much of a question, but rather drawing Brother Makios' attention to some of the provocations that Jean-Pierre's paper draws. So I think I'm interested in how would you respond to that if you think about the process of reconciliation following the Kukuraindi. Was it a reconciliation of Ndebele elites and Shona elites that left out the people? Was it a forced reconciliation where the Ndebele people still feel disgruntled, but they are forced to reconcile even against their wishes? Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Evans. I missed yesterday, so I think I will learn from you notes. I listened to the presentations, and I think that one of the questions that comes when we talk about African traditional epistemologies, when you are a student going through academia, you hear of Nordic Africa Institute. You hear about African studies faculties in Western settings. Do we have such in Africa? How do we get this episteme within our own context that speaks about us? When we talk about the political development of Africa, I have a book that was written in 1930 by a European, not an African. So we're talking about African traditions. How do we make sure that those are established within our context, driven by our own people who can actually maintain this? That's one. Then I'm hearing about, that was a question. So then now I'm talking about reconciliation. I lived a bit in North America, and the truth and reconciliation by Tutu. There is also truth and reconciliation in Canada against Canadian immigrants and the native people who are First Nations. And one of the things that I learned in 2012 when I attended, and several times I attended these meetings, is that reconciliation is not one-sided. And taking from my contribution here, actually, which really came out of my attendance in those, is what I understood is that reconciliation, according to Paulo Freire, takes what we call participatory education. Do we have such structures when we talk about participatory education? Do we know the gaps of knowledge in the people? But also the third thing is that when we talk about, I think one of the presenters talked about the people who fought for our liberation became our oppressors. Why? This is a question which we do not ask me. Assimilation goes deeper than just scratching on the ground. And I think that we really need to go deeper into researching this. So the first thing I would propose for this is that we really need to go back and understand why our traditional pathways, which are not necessarily bad, are not in existence anymore. That's one. Walter Rodney talked about education. Paulo Freire talks about education. Education for the colonizer was the entry to our own sphere. And education is the only way we are going to actually catch up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Moses, for the presentation on Sudan conflict. I just want to add my voice, given that I'm also partly a Sudanese. And one of the things that I didn't see you address to is about some of the resource sharing among the Sudan, the North, and the South. And basically, what is happening is even causing more chaos than it was anticipated. Because there's untold suffering actually in South Sudan as a result of crime and sold by the North. So whatever happens in the North actually affects the South. So there is an economic instability in South Sudan because of that. And I don't know how they are going to address it because it's basically significant. So I just ask you, my friend Moses, maybe as you are looking at the conflicts in South Sudan, it'd be good also to amplify that because it's something that is very important. That many refugees and the revenues have dwindled in South Sudan and it's affecting the whole country. It's a real issue. Thank you. I know there is a question here and two this side. So those are 4 questions. But there are those who are following us online, and there's a question from YouTube. So we want to listen to that. Then I will check the last 4, and we have them answer all of them. Most of them are comments anyway. So we'll check the last 4, then we close the session. Is that okay? Yes. Okay, you have no choice. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you. There is this question from our viewers and participants online on YouTube. And so we are glad to be with you who are watching us and taking part in this conference online. So this question comes from Afiz Sufiani, and he's saying, thank you, presenters. I'm Afiz. My question centers on Sudan. Can you say that the independence of South Sudan is fruitful or a failure and futile? You get the question?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
My question was also about South Sudan, because you mentioned, Moses, that it's very resource rich, but it seemed like that might be related to the oil extraction there. I'm not sure if you all talked about that a bit some moments ago in your comments back, but how are you thinking about sustainable energy and possible divestment from oil extraction and the impacts of that on the environment, not just in terms of the globe, but for local peoples, right? And so I guess I'm curious about the history of that and local peoples, their health, and if it means to be self-determined or collectively determined over those resources, is it to also fuel this larger global crisis around the climate and oil extraction? Or is it to reimagine what resources look like, period, that aren't to partake in being in sort of competing with Western powers? So, because I very much so understand the need for control over resources, but I think there should be a shift in what resources mean in terms of sustainable living for peoples in general. So,
Thank you.
I've heard the term Sudanese Arab being used, and I was a little confused. So maybe if you could shed clarity on it, because I know Sudanese people exist in different shades, but I've never thought of them as Arab. I know there is how do we call it? A battle of narratives also, and also in the creation, especially by the Pan-Arab movement, kind of to create a ruling class to reinforce that notion of Arabism and racial superiority. But I think because I think they're more light-skinned than Arab, because I met this guy, he was like, you know me, I'm an Arab. Looked at him, he looked exactly like me. Saying this is a strange Arab, because I've never seen such a shade of Arab. But if you could like really clarify that term, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question goes to first Makios from Zimbabwe. I would like to find out if the conflicts that are still popping up in Zimbabwe is a continuation of the Shumrenga spirit. Because when you look at the Shumrenga spirit, its centrality of land is what it is. And could that be the spirit behind what is happening? Then for Sudan, the case for Sudan is perhaps not unique because it seems to revolve around resources, land. Because if you look at the Eastern Congo, what is happening in Eastern Congo is a similar situation that we have in Sudan. Now, what have you put in place to avoid the Rohingya crisis in Sudan? I think you are very much aware of Myanmar, what happened, which was actually basically on two fronts, the ethnic cleansing and the religious identity. Those two aspects fueled the tension that is there. So, and again, maybe on the curriculum in South Sudan, what have you done at your national curriculum to ensure that the values of Ubuntu, Ujamaa are actually inculcated in the curriculum from the tender age, so that as they grow up with that understanding that you are one people, you belong together, so that you do not fight amongst yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally.
Thank you so much. Mine is just in curiosity. When Pierre from Zimbabwe represented the chiefdoms. My sister there liquidated some of the issues I wanted to raise. It's about Marumere abolishing chiefdoms and the chiefs, whatever the institution or chiefdom. 1962. The basis for that was chiefs during the struggle for independence were cooperating with the colonizers. They had a party. The party was for the settlers as well as chiefs. So they were at loggerheads with Tano nationalist movement. Of course, there are a lot of conflicts internally. At the end of the day, when independence was granted, Mwalimu decided to abolish chiefdoms. And some of them were sent to exile. And there are a lot of conflicts involved in it. So it ended that way. Okay, my sister mentioned that they are still there powerful. In fact, it is trying to come up. And the other day I was listening to the Minister for Culture and something, and they were saying, you know, the institution of chiefdom is in my office. I was laughing because it's as if it's not aware that there is a law that abolished chiefdoms. And that law, it's there, it's still there. It's not repealed. Anyway, I laughed. And unfortunately, the chief was a lawyer. And so I was wondering what is he talking about? Anyway, but we are trying as much as possible to bring again chiefdoms. Our president is Chief Wangaya. That is a struggle to bring again chiefdoms. But the law is still there. Anyway, my interest is, how are you in Zimbabwe managing to incorporate the chiefs in the existing institutions of governance and the other things without bringing whatever conflicts and so on and so forth? Because Mwalimu was aware the basis for chiefdoms is basically some traditional material conditions, including ethnic identity, tribalism, and the like. So he was aware if you entertain chiefdoms, apparently you are sowing seeds of discord where you will have tribalism emanating. Friends from Kenya, I think you know, I'm not sure whether it's out of chiefdoms or something else. We managed to wipe out, at least to some extent, tribalism in Tanzania, ethnic, whatever. It's not that much stronger. Mwalimu managed to do that, and it's on that basis. My interest in Zimbabwe, how are you managing
it? Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are very many questions and comments, very many. But your answers stand between us and lunch. I don't know how you're going to manage, even when you think about the chiefdoms. I'm worried about the many questions and the comments. But only you will decide.
We can manage.
Okay.
Yeah, we can manage.
So do you want to go first, Moses?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I will be brief. Let me start from the last questions that I have received. The question about what are we doing as South Sudanese to address issues, the national curriculum. Yes, as we all know that most countries that have gone through to independence period, the first target is actually education. If you are to actually set history right, the first target is actually the system of education, but also the curriculum. You know, so South Sudan has already addressed that because most of our curriculum before independence was actually heavily Islamized. Even mathematics is also, you know, in an Islamic way. So that was changed. The contents like referring to camels, referring to donkeys. In South Sudan, there is nowhere you can see camels around. So students and pupils They can read about camels, but they cannot see camels, not even donkeys, because these animals are mostly in the north, but not in the south. So our animals are not reflected. So we had to make sure that those are clarified. So the issue of curriculum was actually handled, and even our curriculums study our own identity as South Sudanese, you know, because in Sudan the story was completely different, and I think I will connect that with the question that Sungu asked about the identity of Arabs, for example. That's actually a very big debate, because Sudan, from the name of the country itself, means Ardha-Sud, the land of the blacks. As Sudan, in Arabic, means Ardha-Sud, okay, means the land of the blacks. Now, where does the Arab identity is coming? Because even it's not reflected in the name of the country, Ardha-Sud, Ethiopia, the land of the black. It means Sudanese people are not necessarily Arabs. You know, they are actually Sud, they are black people. But of course, the Arab identity was used after independence of Sudan, because the power was mostly centered in the north, and they believed that the Arab identity is important for mobilizing financial support and solidarity from the Arab world. That was mostly the reason. And therefore, the Arabs in Sudan, there were actually few. And that's why even educational curriculum during the British time, there was actually history talking about the entry of Arabs into Sudan. Dukul al-Arab fi Sudan. And it's written even in Arabic. That was changed because they had to change that from the entry of Arabs into Sudan to the entry of people. It was made vague. Because if it is people, then it is everyone. How did people enter Sudan? You see? So the idea was to take away the myth. But even with that, there are ethnic groups in northern Sudan. They are called Jaliin. You might have heard. Jaliin. Jaliin from Arabic comes from Jal, Jalnakum. Jalnakum means we have made you indigenous people. It means you are not actually indigenous people. So the name Jaliin remains as evidence that actually they came, and they were made to be indigenous. So there is a lot that we can talk about the issue of Arab identity in Sudan. Actually, if they are told they are Arabs, they are actually few, less than 5%. Most people are actually of Arab origin, I mean of African origin. The Darfur, the Nubas.
38%.
Yeah?
38%.
30?
38%.
These are the Arabs?
62% Africans.
Okay, the remaining ones are Africans. The Nuba, the Funj, the Darfur. Even in the far north, we have the Nubians. Some of them are in Egypt. These are not actual Arabs. They are actually African in origin. So, about the sustainable energy and oil extractions, yes, of course, oil comes with its problem. And that's why we in the civil society, we call for environmental audit. Our people living in oil-rich areas, they actually, there are situations where children are born in a very ugly way. Deformed, yes, deformed, you know. And that's why we call, and even animals die because the water is contaminated. And also there are diseases in oil areas that is associated actually to pollution. And so that aspect is being handled, and we lobbied it actually hard as civil society. We went to the parliament, and I remember we had actually a seminar in the parliament to talk about the issues of pollution in the oil-rich area. And 2 years later, the government actually ordered for environmental audit. Now we are actually expecting the result of the environmental audit to be published so that we can pick it from there, because that report will give us a very clear view. Most of the oil companies do not take issues of environment serious. The government, our government, is also a shareholder. And we expected our government actually to take issues of environmental hazards serious. And of course, we have to wait until that report is out, then we will pick it from there. Regarding the other question, the question from Hafiz about independence of South Sudan. Was it fruitful or a failure? I am a proud South Sudanese. I will say it. If your question is about whether independence of South Sudan is a failure or is fruitful, I will say it's fruitful. Independence by itself is fruitful because the South Sudanese voted more than 98% in favor of independence. It means that is the will of the people, and it is their rights. Now, how we manage our own country after independence, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And I know many countries that have gone through a struggle, years of a struggle to independence, they have all gone through that challenge of how to manage the country after independence. That's our challenge, Hafiz, but we are working to fix it. We feel we still, independence is not an event. Independence is a process. We have succeeded in getting a country that we can call our own, but fixing this country will take time. And we are actually investing in that to see to it that South Sudan will fix its country to become a country that all will be proud about. Regarding the question of resources in South Sudan, which Dr. Charles rightly mentioned, yes, South Sudan is a landlocked country. We don't have ports, and we use Port Sudan in Sudan in order to have our oil transit to international market. And with the conflict in Sudan, the oil transit is interrupted. And I think, of course, there are interests there, because if oil goes through, the money, the Sudanese government will continue to get what? It is share of the oil. And that's why it appears one narrative is that the armed group said the oil should pass on condition that the payment should not be made to the Sudan government now, but later after peace is returned. Because if it is paid now, they can use the money in order to strengthen their military position to fight the armed group. And that's the condition. And that's why the oil is disrupted. So we have a lot actually to, we depend on our neighboring countries, particularly Sudan, to have the oil go to the international market. And therefore, it is very important for us that the conflict in Sudan should come to an end so that peace is restored. We have issues of IDPs, for example, from Sudan. And that's also a responsibility to the neighboring country. And the continuation of conflict in Sudan actually poses a threat, not only to South Sudan, but actually to the region, because we know what happens normally when a country is in crisis. The neighbors also suffer. So you are right, Charles, that's a very important point. Coming to the question about DDR in South Sudan, DDR, based on the revitalized peace agreement, is that before the combatants comes for training, because the agreement says the army and the armed group, the former rebels, should come for a training so that they are trained as one unified force. Now, based on the agreement, when they come for training, they are supposed to be screened. They are supposed to be screened first. so that they can identify which ones are fit to continue with the military training and which ones are supposed to be put on DDR list. So far, there is a challenge because most of the people who came for training, they presume themselves fit. You know, even those who are old, they said, well, since I fought in the battlefields, I am fit. And that's why the DDR process is still facing a challenge. But we know with the agreement, the transitional period coming to an end, this challenge can be addressed because the DDR process is very important. And also, we in the civil society, we are advocating for a DDR process that actually will actually provide an alternative solution for those who cannot continue with the military. They should have a source of livelihood, because you cannot just say you go on DDR, you come and receive this little monthly salary or whatever. That's not enough. They should be given alternative means for livelihood so that they can have a dignified kind of transition. I think these are the questions posed addressed to me. The question about diversity, I have actually somehow addressed it. In South Sudan, we don't have actually much issues to do with ethnicities. Ethnic diversity is, everybody is recognized, because even our language, all our languages are national languages. During Sudan, it was only Arabic language which was made to be a national language. When we attained our independence, all national languages are meant, and they are actually national languages, and the government is asked to actually promote those languages so that we can also have our literature in our local languages. So these are the responses I can provide. If you need more, please, we can have a conversation over lunchtime. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses.
Okay. I also hope I'll be able to cover all these questions, but I'll just put them in one group. Yeah, it's true, my sister. As Africans, we should be known that we've got a culture, we've got a history, and we have been in existence long before this colonialism came. And that should be appreciated by us, the scholarly field, the politicians, and everybody who may want to intervene in Africa. In Zimbabwe, but I think Namibia, Swaziland, Lesotho, Botswana, we use Roman Dutch law. In a nation where there are few Romans and there are few Dutch, it's Roman Dutch law, which on its own, I would believe is something that, if we're going to really engage to erase the face of neo-colonialism in Africa, these are serious issues we should be considering from both the academic to the praxis level. So, how effective has been the traditional models? Like I still need to insist, not primitive models, traditional models. Long before, if you were not married according to the Roman Dutch law in Zimbabwe, that marriage was not fully recognized. So on divorce, separation, the death of a spouse, every woman who was married under the customary law, that marriage was not recognized. It was only, I think, 3-4 years that the government, through the chiefs and the traditional leaders, changed that. So right now, a couple can be married at a traditional level, fully recognized legally at a national level. So it has worked. I wouldn't say traditional models are perfect. They can't, because even the other models are not. So I would respond to a question that What we may need are further researches, upgrading, and making fit with the contemporary world that we are in. On the issue of religion, bias, and the issue of what if the traditional leaders are lying to us. I would say the Western colonizers have always been liars to us since we encountered them. So I think we can navigate it that way. Even if our traditional leaders can lie to us, we have been lied through and through by the other side. So I think we can navigate it that way. On the women issue, I'll give you the Zimbabwean example. We have got 6 female chiefs right now and 15 female headsmen as we speak. It's something that they are working on, something that we are working on. Chiefdoms in Zimbabwe really are not tribal. We don't have a real tribal issue in Zimbabwe. They are not really identified as tribes, but basically it's about the regions. The tribal issue that we had was within the shore, now it's about 80% of the population in the Dola. But I'll come to it when I'm going to address that other issue. On active non-violence, vis-a-vis economic empowerment, active non-violence is not passive. No. It's non-violent resistance. Just for background, I became a non-violent practitioner after we led a 2-week violent protest of students in Arab, destroyed the cars of everybody by the office of the minister. That's when Academ came to us. Academ is the former past president of IFO. He took about 16 of us as student leaders and began to teach us better ways of engaging your adversary. And we got more results through active non-resistance than violence. That's for another. Then on the issue of the Gukura Wundi, for background purpose, the Gukura Wundi is the battle of the war, the civil disturbance that happened in Zimbabwe from 1982 to 1987. It was terrible. It was the Shona versus Bindebele, Zimbabwe versus Zimbabwe. It was terrible, and I'm a Shona by location. I never supported it. And most Ndebeles never supported it, but it was terrible. So it took 5 years. The war ended. The Ndebeles agreed, but not because their concerns were addressed. The machinery that was fighting was too much. So Joshua Nkomo, in order to protect the Ndebeles, made an agreement with Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Apparently and unfortunately, like what Matt said, we never had a truth and reconciliation process. We had a reconciliation process without the truth aspect. And it's still a boiling issue. That issue, we've tried to suffocate it, but it can't. For background, a simple example, 8 years ago, I went to conduct a non-violence training workshop in Bulawayo. I had 4 other elders. The Ndebele elders stood up and said, can all the 4 elders go out? Would rather listen to this young man, was one to believe by his age he was not involved in the Gukura. It was only last year that the new president, Emerson Mnangagwa, has now started another process, which we believe that one is going to bring real truth and reconciliation. Yes, most of the liberators that fought for independence is true. They are now part of the oppressors. But allow me just to pause this. I want to think that most of the liberation heroes of us, they became our oppressors because they became collaborators with the Western colonizers. So the element of the Western colonizer should never be removed from what's happening in Africa. I believe Africa needs to be to self-theologize, that's the religious side, self-politicize. We need to seriously interrogate this democracy that was handed over to us. Where does it fit properly? Where does it not fit? Oh, these things are true. And okay. The land issue, you
And
see.
I'm standing, so it means I'm on your case.
So let me stop now.
If there are agents that you need to address, please, in 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay,
Yeah.
let me address the land issue. Yeah. The Mugabe we had in 1980, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, is the same Mugabe we had in 1997. For history purpose, Joshua Nkomo was more popular in Zimbabwe than Robert Gabriel Mugabe. But the British and the Americans were not comfortable with him because Joshua Nkomo was backed by the Russians. So the Mugabe, you know, whether good or right, was a creation of the British and the Western world. He has been who he was since 1980. But the Western world began to only suddenly realize his dictatorship after he took the land in 1997. He has been like that since 1980. So it took them 17 years to realize how bad he was, and it only took him taking the land away, which I believe if he had not taken the land away, he would have died the darling of the Western world up to now. Let me end.
Thank you. Anything, Rudolf? Or
Yes, just brief responses to the two questions that were being posed.
Yeah.
I got the responses from Jean-Pierre.
Okay.
So they're not my responses. Okay, so there is a first question which says, when we talk about reconciliation, how can we involve the grassroots people in the reconciliation process? And the answer here is, in the reconciliation process, we must first listen to the grassroots, develop an attitude of listening and building trust with the people of the grassroots levels to prepare them to accept and become involved in the process. And this is by listening carefully. They are valued, and of course, if we listen to them carefully, it helps to increase the value of the relationship of trust. The second question was, what are the voices of the people who have suffered from torture? Are we taking into consideration the voices of the people? I think almost a similar question. And the answer, taking into consideration the sufferings of both victims and perpetrators is essential. It's a sign of respect and recognition of their dignity. Taking these sufferings into consideration means embarking on a path of individual and collective healing. But let's not forget that the torturer is also a human being in need of healing, so that he or she can become aware of and enter into a process of forgiveness and reconciliation. And for those of you who are here who have watched the cartoon, Kirikou, the Kirikou film, Karaba, the witch in that cartoon, also needed to be free from her wickedness caused by a thorn in her back. I've watched it. I don't know if some of you have also watched it.
Yes.
But there's a comment. And there is a comment which Mr. Jean-Pierre gives. He says the problem with wars in Africa is also the differences between tribes and religions. Between tribes and religions are exploited by internal and external powers to divide populations and exploit them, including the exploitation of raw materials. The principle of divide and conquer applies in a tragic and inhumane way. The problem is therefore deeper than ethnic or religious divisions, yet it is possible to guarantee peace and development by exploiting these resources and distributing income more fairly. The alternative is to educate populations so that they have sound aptitude for resisting attempts to divide them, and so that they can resist non-violently those who wish to divide them in order to monopolize their wealth. These are the responses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That has been the longest session that we've had. Do you agree? I think they need a better round of applause. Hold it. We are not yet there. We are going to do it in a different way. So if you are holding something in your hand, just put it down. We want to do it in a better way. So just have your hands free. If you are in Kenya, this will be a bit political, but we'll do it anyway. So what we'll do is we'll do 1, 2, Straighten out. Then your feet.
Okay.
So, then feet. Then the third one is, so, yes, so one. Then the final one is.
Wow.
So you do that. Remember that, eh? So one. To them. Thank you guys very much.
Announcements.
Yes, let me start then. So for those of us who are interested, paid for, and ready for the discussion, there's a meeting during lunch at the dining of the restaurant. So make sure you're part of that meeting, please.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it's super important. There are both some specifics and some changes. So if you're at all interested or if you signed up, you must be at that meeting at lunchtime. We won't start it immediately. People can get food, but come around. George, myself, some others from here, from Arusha, will have the information about money, about logistics, about time, so you know exactly what's happening, and we'll make the final work there. So lunchtime meeting. Be there.
Got it.
Was there another? Yeah.
Yes. I want to, we've been doing some adjustments for the breakout sessions. And